Welcome to TechTO Quick Takes. I'm your host, Jason Goldlist, and today we are broadcasting this episode on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. As always, we want to hear from you. So drop a comment, share a like, and send us your feedback wherever you're watching or listening, and let us know your takes. You can also listen later on the TechTO Quick Takes podcast. It's available wherever you listen to podcasts. It's Thursday, May 26th, and today we're talking about the federal government makes a big investment in the local venture ecosystem. Humi proves regulations and taxes can be your friend. And timing is everything for Toronto-based startup Moves. Let's get started. First, the federal government makes a big investment in the local venture ecosystem. People have been talking about VCCI. What does that actually mean, Alex?
Well, it's an abbreviation for Venture Capital Catalyst Initiative.
Okay, you're going to have to go deeper than that. That is confusing.
You mean government talk doesn't translate to English? Well, so VICI, as those abbreviations get called, is a federal program to support the local venture ecosystem. The feds will invest $450 million into private sector funds who then in turn invest into Canadian startups. The funds who receive capital from the program have to raise at least 3 times as much money from private investors to unlock the investment from the federal government. So hypothetically, this would create a minimum pool for investment into VC of $1.5 billion.
Got it. So who's going to really get this $450 million?
Okay, so there's 2 ways to break this down. One is, who does the federal government invest in? Who does the VICI program invest in? So $350 million is invested in fund of funds that then go invest in venture capital funds or invest directly into startups. 50 million goes directly into life science funds, and 50 million is invested directly into inclusive growth funds. So ignore the growth, it's just venture capital funds. And these funds are run by what the government says underrepresented people in the venture sector, such as women and members of racialized communities.
Okay, let's talk about the first and the biggest bucket, $350 million in fund of funds. What does that feel like to you, Alex? Does that make you happy?
So let's go, first of all, let's go into a bit more details what that fund of funds have to do.
Okay.
To make those, so again, they have to raise $3 for every dollar they get from the government. But to entice private investors to go into these fund of funds, the cash flow out of those investments is pretty interesting. They basically guarantee that the private investors will get a 5% annualized return, so subsidizing the downside for those private investors to make these fund of funds more attractive. Second of all, the fund of funds then have to invest 60% in Canadian VC funds. 40% can be invested in non-Canadian funds or direct investments. 40% can be of the overall funds from the VCs or the other investments have to be in Canadian companies, and then 90% of direct investments have to be in VC portfolio companies. So very complex structure. You have to monitor your portfolio, and then these funds have to then do a bunch of quantitative and qualitative reporting. How are you building the ecosystem? How are you helping inclusivity? So, so that's what they have to do now. What do I think of the fund of funds?
What do you think of the fund of funds? And what are this 5% business? So wait, the public government is the feds are saying the other private investors put their money in get 5% before they get any. The taxpayer gets any of that money back.
Yeah. Now look, if you have a well-performing fund, it should be doing 20 to 25% a year. So that should be a hurdle that's easily overcome.
Got it.
So maybe I'll give you some context of where this has come from, why it exists, and then I'll talk about what people think of the VICI program overall before I get into fund of funds. So this is the third time a version of this program is being run. The first one was called VCAP. The second one was called VICI. This is VICI 2 or whatever you want to call it. The first time they said we're going to do a one-time program that's going to basically launch and reinvigorate the venture capital community in the ecosystem across Canada. And I would say that's 12 years ago. There's definitely a different ecosystem there. So this probably contributed and changed the ecosystem, because you can look at a lot of the venture funds out there can attribute some of their early capital to the VCAP program. Mm-hmm. And some of the active fund of funds have their venture arms because of that. So, but each time they run it, they say it's the last time. VICI was supposed to be the last time. Then then the venture community and ecosystem said, hey, we need again. They've gone in as far as when they announced this last week. There's a Global Mail article from, I think, the CVCA and the federal government saying this is not going to be needed anymore. And then it's interesting. This now has become a kind of a divided. There's a divided opinion in the ecosystem whether Vicky works or not. Um, and you can imagine on one side is the recipients of the capital, and the other is funds and people that don't receive the capital. The recipients love it, but like what the non-recipients have to say is that lots of this money now goes to the same fund of funds, and they're propping up non-performing funds. They're not going to necessarily the areas of the ecosystem that will most benefit from it. Some will claim, you're de-risking the fund of fund investments, which actually hurts the VC funds. If you have a well-performing VC fund and a fund of fund, but you've got a downside guaranteed, it may get a family office now invest in the fund of funds. Now, maybe they would never invest in venture capital otherwise, so it's a net benefit. But there's people claiming, "Hey, why are you distorting
on the margin?"
the
There's got to be some sort of overlap, right? That makes sense.
Yeah, and at last for the first Vicky, which was there's a lot. They did have an inclusivity, diversity portion, and they try to get some new fund of funds, and quite a few of the partners could not meet the matching amount, so the capital was never deployed. So did they choose the wrong investors? Is there not market appetite for this? I would say some of the funds I know, look, lots of funds actually would have raised anyways without it, and it was just additional capital. But some of the fund managers they chose had no experience in venture and no credibility. So
if you're a Canadian fund, does every Canadian fund apply for this? Like, is this like every single person's looking for it and then only certain are getting selected?
Well, I'd say most people, everyone's going to be open to capital. I think the reason you don't apply is, like, remember, it's the fund of funds. So everyone should be talking to fund of funds. There's Kensington, there's Terralist, there's Northleaf, there's Harborvest, who've had it for the last two, will probably have it again. So everyone should be talking to those as investors. Then applying directly to Vicky, everyone should look at it. And I think there's two reasons you're not going to do it. One is three reasons. One, it's off cycle. So, hey, I'm not raising a fund right now. I don't want to go start the fundraising process again. And there's a lot of funds that just closed last year. But there's a lot of funds that have waited to raise money till it's been on cycle. Second thing is you may not want to have to comply with all the reporting and overhead and direction investment. And third is there's some people that feel they have no chance, right? If you look at it, there's a government scorecard. And if you look correctly, for like lots of funds will have to go to fund to fund route because they're non-life sciences and they don't meet the, inclusivity. What do they call it? Sorry, let's go back.
Underrepresented or inclusive growth
the
funds.
Inclusive growth funds, right?
Yeah.
So you need to have a certain partnership and stuff like that, and there's funds that are 1 GP that's a white male, and they're not going to get it.
Got it. So what do you think is the impact? Like, does that mean there's more capital for Canadian businesses? Like, if you're in the TechTO ecosystem, are you celebrating Vicky too?
Well, look,
or how does it make you feel?
As a founder, more capital should mean more funders, which should mean there's more doors to knock on and more likely get funded. If I was looking at starting a company or raising money next little while, I'd be paying especially close attention to fund of funds because their portion, I think their application deadline is like the end of June, and they're trying to deploy money to September. So those people will probably either have capital ready lined up to go into funds or other funds. So you'll see more capital come in Q3 and Q4 this year down to venture capital companies venture capital funds that want to invest. Also, they might be making direct investments. So you should be paying attention to where the money flows because those are the doors you want to knock on.
Are these going to early stage? Like, if it goes to fund of funds, are those fund of funds have any restriction on what stage the funds?
No, they can invest in any stage. So, right. And if you go to Kensington, or you can go to, like I said, the big recipients have been Harborvest, Kensington, Northleaf, and Terralist. You can see the funds they've historically invested in, and you can imagine a subset of those funds will be raising new funds.
Well, look, I think it'd be really cool for us to get a list of those funds and to share those with the TechTO community to know who's going to expect to have some fresh capital, especially going into a more difficult fundraising environment for funds right now, right?
I agree with you. And I think the last thing is if you do want to break into VC, it may be time to ask around and see what opportunities there are because there's going to be more capital for more associates, principals, partners.
Yeah, more fees for more overhead. Yeah, great.
I don't know if it's fees for overhead, but you need capital to deploy. Otherwise, what are you doing?
Awesome. I love it. I think that's super interesting. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a list of some of who we believe are going to be the likely recipients of some of this cash, 450 million, or at least the 350 for funds of funds from Vicky 2. We're going to put in our newsletter. So if you want to get it on our newsletter, you gotta Head over to techto.org/newsletter to subscribe as we do the research on which funds are going to get that money. Alex, what can people expect in tomorrow's inbox?
Well, tomorrow's is Friday, so we cover interesting news and articles from around the ecosystem. So you may be reading a more in-depth version of one of our quick takes from today, or you may be getting interesting weekend readings for you.
Has there been like a specific article that you've read this week that you know you're going to include?
You're asking me like I remember what I read this week versus last week. So we we have a process here where Alex Riley and me, we put a list together and then she chooses them. So I don't know if it's going to appear this week or next week.
Awesome. Okay, well we'll stay tuned. We'll see what's in the inbox tomorrow. Next up, Humi proves regulations and taxes can be your friends with their most recent round. All right, what does Humi do that they're making friends with regulations and taxes?
So when Humi launched, they focused on Canadian companies and provided HR, payroll, and benefit solutions. So making it easier to pay your employees, to provide benefits.
Now, there's a lot of players in that space. So how has Humi found an edge over other providers there?
Well, I think there's two ways to look at it. There's the big US startups that you hear about, Rippling, Gusto, a bunch of others.
None of those operate in Canada, though.
Yeah, that's your regulatory and taxes edge, right? Those people have a big market to serve. Each province and each state have different regulations. So those people are like, hey, we're not going to touch Canada right now. There's so much to do in the States. And I think if you look at the Canadian market, I don't think there's a direct competitor to Humi. I think there may be at one point, but they're like a digital first, digital native approach. And I think they've benefited a lot from, the last few years where teams have gone distributed, right? So they make it, so traditionally lots of your providers focus in a jurisdiction. Hey, we've got Toronto covered, Ontario covered, and then maybe we have a hole in Alberta. But when you go distributed, distributed teams, Humi covers the countries digital first, makes it easy on board, and has built a lot more cloud-based solutions beyond original view. But like, how do we onboard employees remotely? It's a totally different approach than the traditional players in the market.
Yeah, I love it. And so you said that they benefited a little bit from distributed teams and I guess the pandemic fallout. So over the pandemic, how fast has this company grown?
They claim they've grown fivefold since August 2019. Now, August 2019 is a bit before the pandemic, so I don't know why they use that as their benchmark. But it seems that as traditional companies have to deal with a different workforce, they were looking for new solutions, new payroll. They had new payroll complexity. They needed, like I said, remote onboarding, digital recruiting, and fivefold since 2019 is, that's not bad.
That's a venture scale return. So tell me more about this deal that just happened.
So talking about fund of funds, Kensington Capital, who's one of the funds we'll list, led a $25 million round. There was also $6 million in debt. It's interesting, there's a couple other investors, but let's double click on Kensington. I think we've talked about them, I think, in the last few months. So they're a fund of fund, and part of their fund, they don't typically directly invest. They'll have a fund of funds will say, okay, we'll invest a bunch in venture capital and we'll keep a small bit for direct investments because that'll boost our returns, and they won't invest early. So what's interesting to see them lead here, and I think we've talked about them. I've seen their name pop up 2 or 3 times in the last month, which is interesting. So it's not clear why this is happening. Either they have to deploy last little capital in the current fund before they go raise more money from Vicky, or they have to meet certain criteria. Hey, maybe this was Humi was in one of their portfolio VC funds and they've invested too much outside them directly. So, or they just think the market's more, market's a bit different right now, so they can lead rounds because, maybe they view the valuations as more reasonable.
So give me some inside baseball on how venture works in this case, Alex. Like if a fund of fund is keeping some money aside for direct investing, aren't they competing on deals with the fund of funds that they're investing in?
Yes and no. So again, inside baseball, I'm raising a new fund. I invest in pre-seed and seed. I'm talking to a lot of fund of funds. Why? For a couple reasons. One is what they bring is they bring capital that will be usually dedicated for 2 or 3 funds. They say, hey, we'll invest in your next fund, and we want to build a partnership, so we'll invest in fund, now X plus X1 plus X2. Second of all, if you have a good relationship, they'll bring other LPs that will invest directly into you. And what's interesting for me, I'm not a multi-stage fund. So I have this pro rata rights if I'm, and maybe I have a good relationship with the founders where I can help them, my founders, and I can help my LPs by introducing them for the later stages. So it works well. Like Kensington does not want to invest in pre-seed or seed. They probably want
Right.
A or B rounds. And so if they're invested in a fund that, it keeps the money it keeps the money influence in the family. So that's how it works well.
And so in that case, they almost use the fund of funds as like, lead gen or deal flow for later stage investments. So in this case with Humi, were they part of a fund to fund that Kensington has been following for a long time that they invested in?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have to go look at more at who their portfolio is. And remember, there's always going to be a restriction how much direct investing they can do. So this is basically they're saying, hey, we're going to get a great return from our VC funds.
Yeah.
And this is going to hypothetically, we're going to pick the one or two winners that will boost our returns and make the economics better. Because what a fund of funds does is they put another layer of fees and carry on top of the VC funds. So they provide their investors access to those VC funds, curation of those VC funds, but then they had this higher hurdle to return money to their investors.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so what can we learn from this? What's the takeaway of this deal?
Well, like how you call this section, regulation taxes can be your friend. They provide a moat. Like, everyone's talking about what's, when you go to raise money, everyone's like, what's your moat? What, how are you going to, prevent competition? Well, if you're starting in a geographic area that's large enough, it could be a moat, but it's not like the States. It could provide a moat from the big incumbents to come attack you, right? They're going to have a lot to do in the States and focus on scaling there. The flip side is entering the States. Now you have a moat that the incumbents have a moat because they know the regulations and taxes there. So I think one of the challenges here is how you take this moat at the beginning that prevents competition and quickly overcome it when you go to another jurisdiction and not just be someone that gets acquired by the incumbent from Europe or the States.
Right.
I think, what we didn't talk about is Humi basically had these 3 products at the beginning, which didn't look necessarily venture scale, but have then put a bunch of other digital products and expand their relationship and the value of that customer. So they start off with payroll. Now I'm sure they charge a SaaS fee for like digital onboarding, digital recruiting. So they built a really good relationship and they're taking that sales channel and cross-selling against it. And then finally, going back to what you said about this current market, you want to keep track of the other investors like the fund of funds and start building relationships with them.
Yeah. I think number 2 in particular is really interesting. And, when we started TechTO, there weren't a lot of venture scale opportunities that were Canada only, and folks were really focused on going global. And I think we start to see over the last few years more and more, especially in fintech, venture scale opportunities and outcomes that are Canada focused. So hopefully Humi continues in that, and hopefully there's hope for some of the early stage startups doing the same thing in Canada as well.
So I'll say one other thing, which is interesting about the difference with Canadian only companies right now or Canada only. You look at them and they start off what looks like, they're being inspired by a US competitor. But what they've quickly done is they get their initial wedge in. And unlike the US competitor, which is going deep in that wedge, they're quickly expanding beyond that wedge. So if you look at, your former employer, Wealthsimple, they look like a Betterment or Wealthfront when they launched, but they're now, Coinbase and Robinhood or Public, maybe you want to use Public now, not Robinhood. But there are multiple different startups combined, and they use that wedge to quickly get much bigger.
The finance super app.
Yeah,
that's right. So I love that trend. I think there's lots of opportunity. And so I think the advice is keep going on your one wedge, build it, and then find new opportunities to cross-sell to your customers. Which is great. And if you want to keep talking strategy with us, we are continuing our IRL events in real life. This summer, we're going to be in Toronto and Vancouver all summer long. So if you're in Vancouver, mark your calendar for June 13th. And if you're Toronto, got to circle up June 21st. We'll have July and August and September dates coming soon. You can come meet and mingle with the brightest minds in your local ecosystem over some great food and drinks. You can reserve your ticket. We might still have some early bird tickets left. I'm not sure. If you head over to techto.org.
Hold on, Jason, you know what? We're missing one city.
What are we missing?
Montreal. I think.
Yeah, but we running events in Montreal. Are we doing it?
Yeah, I don't think the team has decided to do it, but I think if you're interested in seeing us in Montreal, like just for a social event this summer, ping me, Alex at techto.org, and we'll look at putting one up there.
We'll bring the show on the road. We'll
it,
see you in Montreal.
I need an excuse. I don't really need an excuse to go to Montreal, but in the summer, Montreal's amazing, and I think we should be there.
I love it. I think Phil's running Startup Fest this year.
Yes, he is.
That's
maybe
awesome.
we should go. We should go there and have an event.
Bring back the train, the startup train, and get everyone out to Montreal. All right, our last piece of news for today: timing is everything for Toronto-based startup Moves after closing a $5 million round. I think we've spoken about Moves before. They're the ones creating a financial platform for gig workers. Haven't we seen that before?
There's been a few attempts, and particularly if this company called Clearco you may have heard of. I think their first iteration before several pivots was providing short-term loans to Uber drivers, and that didn't work for them. So they pivoted once, I think, to Airbnb, which I guess you can consider gig workers, and another time to e-commerce, and now the rest is history.
So what is Moves doing differently to avoid the same mistakes that we've seen before?
So I think there's two parts of what Moves doing differently. I think Moves, first of all, and both of them are related to timing. I think the gig worker industry has matured in the last 6 years, where there's a lot more gig opportunities. There is people now that, I think Uber drivers in general, and in particular 6-7 years ago, it was a part-time gig. But now you've got gig workers that will work in multiple platforms, and it's their full-time thing, or this is their permanent, like they're not doing this as a side gig, they're doing this on an ongoing basis. And I think the platforms themselves have matured. So what this has enabled Moves to do differently is they've went and talked to their customers. They focus on, hey, if you're doing this part-time or for short time, so part-time's not the word, but if you're doing this to make ends meet for a month, we don't want to serve you. But if you're doing this on an ongoing basis, we're going to serve you. And they built a platform that serves those unique subset of customers' needs. They start off with basically saying, hey, we're to make you owners in these platforms. So they launched, I think it's called the Moves Collectives, which says for all the hours you log and the money you put through us, you'll earn shares or fractional shares in the platforms you're working for. And they partner with Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Grubhub, Target, and Amazon to give shares to the collective.
Like those are the publicly traded ones.
Publicly traded ones. Yeah, yes, right now, right?
Sense.
And then what they do is they collectively poll all the shareholders to represent the gig workers at the annual general meetings and put causes on it and actually sort of collectively bargain out. Maybe that's not the right word, and that'll scare people. But
that is cool. So so behind this financial platform, it's I don't want to say like a hedge fund, but like they're sort of doing advocacy or investing, and they're going to be managing, one day a large fund and have big positions held in these companies themselves.
Well, I think they're going to represent the gig workers. And what's interesting here is the gig companies actually like this program because they're trying to keep these people engaged and as employees. Now these people have ownership and it's representing them. The other thing which Moves found out is, hey, they want the advances, but more importantly is lots of these people work on multiple platforms. So they've integrated with, I think, 15 or 16 platforms to provide earning insights, make it simple for these people to manage their complex lifestyle.
So instead of just partnering with Uber or just partnering with Lyft, the people are on all the different platforms, maybe even they're doing Instacart also, they're doing whatever, and all of it now is on the Moves dashboard.
Yeah. So and they're building up. And I think if you were to ask, Matt, the founder, and full disclosure, I'm an investor and was an investor in Moves before this round, is their vision is not to be a neobank, but more to be like a credit union that represents the gig workers. And this is a big category. They haven't been served. So you'll see, I think, a lot more interesting products that represent their needs and the stuff they couldn't do on without someone coordinating activities.
Well, I think it sounds super cool. How is this all working out for them so far?
So they have 10,000 members, and they project those members will earn $56 million this year. Obviously, you had Omer's Ventures lead this $5 million round, so they like what they see. And what's interesting is you've got the gig workers who seem to enjoy it, and the platforms that are eager to see this out. I think if you go back 6-7 years ago, they'd probably, say, we don't want you getting, accessing our platforms. We want you to do this, but it seems to be well received, and it seems to be doing well.
I love that. Okay, so let's say you're a gig worker or not a gig worker, building your startup here in Canada. what can you learn from this deal and from what Moves is doing?
So first of all, some timing matters. Go back to when Clearco had a similar insight. Hey, there's gig workers that need help. I think at that time, gig working was looking at something you just do to make ends meet when you need to make it. Now there's people saying this is actually a career choice. I want the flexibility. I want to be able to turn on and turn off. I want to be able to choose which platform I'm working on. So the mindset of there's actually a bunch of workers that are gig workers permanently. Second thing is the platforms are much more conducive. They're more mature. They're not looking at this. How do we let other parties provide benefits to our, let's not call them employees, but our contractors and make life easier for them. So those two things have clearly changed, and the timing was not possible. I think also you have more regulations and tax laws, which put less confusion. I think the second thing is, if you read everything you learn about Moves, they are mission oriented. Their mission is to make gig workers' lives better. They talk to customers, and every communication and everything about this, it's a clearly defined mission. And what they're getting is, I think, not only customers, but they call them members. They're calling their fans. And I think that gives them an unfair advantage in getting customers or fans that will help spread the word and help them develop the product with them. So we talk a lot, lots of times in business, you talk about very transactional, but when you put your mission first and you communicate it, it helps people get excited with you and it lets you make more mistakes. Not that I've made mistakes, but it allows your customers to become advocates and help create a winning company. So
that's what everybody wants. You want to create advocates. You want a winning company. I think it sounds awesome, Alex. All right. Thanks, man. Holy cow. What a week in Canadian tech. As always, you got to like and subscribe to TechTO wherever you're watching or listening, and share your takes with us on your week in Canadian tech. And we'll see you in the TechTO Insider Membership Program. We call it The Inside.
We're in the business of delivering impossible things. We're in the business of delivering things that nobody's ever seen before.
If you build that culture, you'll come up with really cool and innovative stuff, and literally could be in the next multi-billion-dollar idea. So this conversation is largely going to be about scaling yourself and scaling your leadership team.
I want to talk about one of the biggest struggles that I think a lot of startups face early on, which is building initial traction.